welcome everybody to the first, the last, and the only podcast for the D&D podcast. D&D stands for Downton, not Downtown. And this podcast will focus on how media, politics, dominant powers are all interrelated and how they kind of work off each other to push dominant ideologies on the public. And so today we'll be focusing on Downton Abbey, hence the name of the podcast. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to, well, actually, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Elias. I'm a third year at UCR.
I'm Luke. I'm a third year at UCR, and I'm an MCS major.
I'm Leslie. I'm a fourth year at UCR.
I'm Tara. I'm a fourth year at UCR, double majoring in theater and film, MCS, Media and Cultural Studies, and then also minoring in Spanish.
And I'm Marcus, and I'm also a third year MCS major.
All right, awesome, cool. So, Tara, do you want to go ahead and dive into our text for today?
Yeah, for those who don't know, Downton Abbey is a British historical drama television series that was started by Julian Fellowes, and the show originally aired from 2010 to 2015. It spans 6 seasons. It did gain worldwide popularity for its portrayal of the lives of the aristocratic Crawley family and their servants. The series is set in the early 20th century, specifically in the fictional Downton Abbey estate in Yorkshire, England. The show does cover a wide range of historical events, from World War I to the sinking of the Titanic, and it also covers the social changes of the early 20th century, particularly in relations to class, which is very important. The main storyline does revolve around the Crawley family, which is led by Robert Crawley and his wife Cora, and along with their family, children, various servants, they are also central characters in the show. Now, key themes that are explored in the show, which is very important to us, include class disparity, family loyalty, love, social change, that sort of thing. The show has been praised for its detailed period setting, strong performances, and complex characters, but underneath that, we got to kind of talk about the misrepresentation and some of the lies that we get to see as the TV show progresses. There was a successful movie adaptation in 2019, but we will not be talking about that. We are just going to concentrate on the first season of Downton Abbey.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Tara. Cool. So let's just dive into it. It's season 1 has 7 episodes. We'll go ahead and start off with season 1.
Yeah, so a quick summary of the first episode of season 1. So the series begins in the year 1912 with the news that the heir to the Crawley estate, James Crawley, and his son Patrick, they die aboard the Titanic, and this leaves the future of the estate uncertain, as the next in line to the estate is a distant cousin, Matthew Crawley, who is a middle-class lawyer. The family is thrown into turmoil as they navigate the change in leadership and estate management. Meanwhile, the servants have their own stories, with Mr. Bates, the new valet, struggling with a mysterious past, and Lady Mary Crawley dealing with the fallout from a scandalous romantic encounter.
That's a lot of stuff to throw in your face.
First and foremost, cousins getting married, ew, right? But I think even that's like that's overlooked. The way it's presented, obviously, one, that's probably a common thing that was happening back in the days, but again, in public nowadays, it's not happening. And it's even intentional how that's presented on screen.
Right,
you know?
and it was actually much more prominent in the hierarchy and the higher levels of the aristocracy. It was not nearly as common in like the lower levels because they didn't care about keeping their bloodlines pure. So the idea of marrying a cousin, second cousin, third cousin was a much bigger deal to keep the the blue bloods clean. Yeah. So that they definitely got that right. But it's not really talked upon, which I think a lot of people in kind of the modern era were like, they're gonna marry them, their cousins.
No, exactly. I thought I don't know about you guys, but I thought it was very interesting how they started off and opened up the whole show with sinking of the Titanic, because the way I understood it from a critical lens was essentially they're laying the foundation for like how historically accurate the show is going to be. After watching the show, we can all agree this is, I wouldn't say far, but in some areas very far from historical accuracy. And I think the use of that Titanic, that fact right there, kind of just plays with the mind of the audience, trying to make it seem like, we're going to be historically accurate. We're going to tell you all the facts about this time period. When in reality, it's like, no, it's way romanticized, and a lot of things are censored.
Well, and using those big events from history are, like you said, going to kind of speak to the legitimacy, but it also really does help kind of set the timeline in people's mind, because yes, we know about the sinking of the Titanic, we know about World War I, so being able to use those kind of brings people back to reality when the rest of the episodes are set in stories that are not reality, that are romanticized, they're covered with nostalgia. So those are the few kind of flashbacks to reality where it's like, oh, okay, so the Titanic happened, World War I's about to start, this is probably how people felt during that time, when it's like, this is just how we're imagining it.
Yeah. So, Luke, we had discussed that no one really has seen the show prior to taking the class, but you did express that your mom has seen the show.
Yeah.
Do you think that she views it differently, or like she picks up on things like this?
I'd say she's definitely more drawn to like how we sort of view the show from like a more base standpoint, just like sort of the like glamour of the estate, how magnificent and beautiful like this upper class like sort of like it's mostly it's a community really of like the whole estate and everything, but then also like the drama, it's a nice casual view for most people. And I mean, I think most people when watching it wouldn't really take a sort of deeper like look into this and how this might affect us, how we feel emotionally and like sort of culturally in the present day.
Does she watch any other shows that are kind of like it, Gilded Age, Jane Austen movies, that
I'm
sort
sure
of thing?
she has.
Yeah.
She really likes like the sort of like British culture and like the history about all that stuff.
It's crazy how I was reading something, or actually one of our assigned readings talks about how Britain especially tries to commodify like their culture. Obviously America, we do it. I think I see it a lot with like hip hop and it being infiltrated into like fashion. But British, like Britain, what they got going for them is their past. That's like a commodity for them. Like even thinking now we're like the joke, it's like tea and crumpets. But like that's so common because like that's what they're known for.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was really interesting how that has its own like sub community, subcategory of fans. Just the
and
history
it's across
of Britain.
the world too, how basically the idea is that Britain is the best. To be British is the highest level of elegance and decorum and society. And I mean, of course, it goes back to to Britain conquering and colonializing so many places. I mean, even talking about, places like India, where Downton Abbey is a really big following. But that was a country that was absolutely colonized by the British. And a lot of at the time of Downton Abbey as well. So these are people who were completely, their ancestors, their families, their country was taken over by the British, but they still love watching Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
We have our professor who actually says she still falls asleep to Downton Abbey. It's actually calming for her,
Peaceful,
even
yeah.
though her, she's from India and her ancestors went through the British colonialism. But even in her mind, it's still just a fun show. So like, where does that come from? Where, it's the nostalgia. It's the idealized romanticism of the past. And one of the things that I had really liked when I was researching, I found, and I'm just going to read a quote to you really quickly, that the idea of these shows and the problems with them are easily batted away as just good fun or good escapist entertainment, but it actually is normalizing a social and political history that's about the empire of Britain, the aristocracy, the monarchy, the established church, and it's a deference to a very rigid and exclusive class hierarchy that if it was actually in play today for most other societies, we would be fighting against it.
Yeah.
So why are we idolizing it in these shows?
Yeah. I think honestly, to pick up on what you said about nostalgia is like so crucial when it comes to like commercial appeal and even mass consumption. Me specifically, I sell vintage and I have like a little vintage clothing store. And nostalgia is, I would tell everyone, like nostalgia, one, is never going to fade, and it's gonna be the number one aspect of how I push so much clothing, because who cares about a shirt from 1950, or who even cares about a show that's depicting the life of people in the past aristocracy, But it's that nostalgia, that aspect that really ties us to it. The reason I can sell a shirt for $100 and it's 100 years old is because someone connects with that, In the same way why Downton Abbey is able to be so well liked by, I would say, the world, the people that watch it, is because, again, they appeal to that nostalgia, to where it's like, don't worry about how people were being treated. Look at how pretty the dress is. Look how great the estate is. Look how great the costume design people were at helping you forget about these past inequalities and just look at how pretty everything looks on screen,
Yeah.
So, but
I when I was researching like the misrepresentation of history and that nostalgia, kind of like rose-colored glasses, there was a really neat article that I had found at the University of New Hampshire. Hampshire. I'm getting into my Downton accent. And this was written by Robin Ray, but what she's actually talking about is this wonderful research paper that, was actually written by, let me find her name really quickly. Her name is Nicoletta Galazzi, and she's an associate professor of history at the University of New Hampshire. And she studies British history. And one of the things that she says is, while historical object styles and period antiquities were meticulously curated to ensure the authenticity of the show, the behavior and the values portrayed by the characters in Downton had a more modern slant, which is very interesting, kind of about talking about the redress of the past and how we kind of connect it to the future, where we take those shows and we put that modern slant on them. And I'm just going to go into something really quickly. There's a really great show called Another Period, and it is satirizing Downton Abbey and the Kardashians, funny enough, and is essentially the American Downton Abbey is what they call it, set in the early 1900s on the East Coast. And they do a lot of kind of the same historical accuracies. But what's really interesting about it is that they take all of these realities of the past and they put that modern slant onto it. So there's the second episode called Divorce. And it's a really interesting episode because it actually broaches how we kind of romanticize all of the horrible things that happen. And in specifically this episode, it's about rape, which of course is referred to as ravishment. They would never use the word rape. It's much too ugly of a word.
It's a commercial appeal right there, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they're satirizing this idea that the two, wives of this family, they have to kind of like make themselves pass out or go to a different space when they have to submit to their husbands in order to, hopefully gain a child. But what's really interesting in this episode is one of the servants is violated. He is raped, and it's a man, by one of the women who is a guest of the house. And it's the way that he is treated after this ravishment, which they keep saying, is that you should have been proud to have been chosen by such an aristocratic person.
That's crazy.
And he is crying, and he's crying. And of course it's done in a humorous way, but he is crying. He's absolutely devastated at what has happened to him. And even the head servant is like, don't ever say anything bad about this. You should absolutely be grateful that you were chosen and that you still have your spot. And if you say anything about this, I will fire you.
Sounds like Diddy. That's crazy.
Right? It's absolutely crazy, but it's really interesting that this satirical show is responding to the fact that this is how we view these shows.
Yeah.
Going back to that article that I was talking about, what's really interesting is that it airbrushes so much of the ugliness, including severe poverty, human rights, abuses, bankruptcy, sexism, sexual abuse, and just how dirty it was to live there. But we don't focus on that.
Yeah.
And that's the question. Why?
Yeah.
Why don't we focus on that? Why do we focus on the romantic aspects instead?
Yeah. I think to add to that, even me and Leslie, we were talking before as to how things are, again, historically inaccurate. Specifically, we're talking about gender, and Leslie, if you want to talk a little bit more on that, on how, like, I think in the show, men and women were kind of almost treated the same, in regards to, like, their tone and, like, how they were talked to where in reality, I'll let you discuss it a little more, but in reality, like, I don't think that was the case with gender roles back in the day,
Yeah, I was talking to Elias about how I think that gender, how men and women were in the show were treated pretty much the same, but historically accurate, they weren't. Women weren't able to even own property, weren't allowed to inherit their own estate, even if they were the oldest. What else?
Well, it's obviously shown with the way that Mary's treated in regards to why they're trying to get the estate changed, is because Mary's a daughter, and they would have to go and push for her as long as she gets married to be able to assume the estate. And why it has to pass to Matthew, because even though she was there,
it's not hers. Yeah. I think one thing I actually noticed as well too is the character Lady Sybil, which is one of the daughters. She's kind of fighting for this new feminist approach at the time, right? Fighting for suffrage. And I thought it was actually interesting, one specific scene where she goes to one of these like voting centers or area where they're kind of discussing politics. She's not supposed to be there. She's a woman, but almost no one acknowledges her. Where in reality, if my my thoughts on reality is if you go somewhere where you're not supposed to be, people will make a scene, you know, like, for example, if that was to happen today, I mean, we even see it today with women marches, with slut-shaming marches, all these types of things. There's always going to be opposing forces there. And I just thought it was interesting that she goes there and no one says anything, where it's like, bro, we're in the past, you know. I would feel like someone would be yelling at her like, yo, what are you even doing here? You know,
but they weren't given a seriousness.
Yeah.
I think, and again, I have to go back to another period because they actually have an episode that deals with the women and the suffragette movement and things like that. And in the show itself, of course, they're, you know, these big, powerful women, but the women, the main women who are also the writers of the show, they actually put down their sister, who's a suffragette, and the other lady who ends up coming in, who is one of the big suffragettes, and they don't take them seriously. And I think that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
That's why probably there wasn't that huge thing, because nobody cared, because they didn't honestly believe in the power of women and that what they were doing. They're just like, whatever. It's just some stupid, you know, shit that women are doing. I'm not even going to worry about it.
Yeah, true. Luke, do you want to speak on Matthew Crawley, his introduction into the show, his kind of internal dilemma, and how we can see, again, historical inaccuracies, media being used to push dominant ideologies like through his character?
Yeah, so we see him sort of in episode 2, really, where he's like this middle-class guy, and he's assigned a butler named Molesley, and he rejects Molesley's help. He feels like he doesn't need someone to like assist him in every aspect of his life. That's not needed, and that he actually tries to like convince Molesley, like, this, you don't need this job. Is this really what you want in your life? But the show kind of waters down this whole sort of conflicting internal argument by just having everyone sort of accept that this is the way that the class structure is supposed to be, that Molesley, his goal in life is to be a butler to this estate and to Matthew. I think it was Lord Grantham that tells Matthew, like, why are you trying to like sway his views or convince him?
But why is Matthew so against having a butler? Like,
so I think he's so against having a butler. Yeah, because one, he doesn't come from the same aristocracy or group of families that they come from. Even though they are family members, he's chosen this life where at the time is, I would say, looked down or frowned upon, where he wants to be his own businessman. He wants to be a lawyer, I believe. And so when he comes back into the estate, he's not familiar with how things work, you know. And again, I think this is actually a very good topic of conversation where Mr. Bates, his chauffeur, his butler, right, he finds pride in like doing his work. And although that may be true for some people, you know, this show really like heightens that to the point where like he feels lost. He feels like he has no purpose, you know, if he's not doing his job. So Matthew coming in and not understanding how things work, not understanding at the time period of this show, this false reality that people really take pride in their work. He's just like kind of writing them off and saying, yeah, we don't need this. You know, you can be like me and go find your own job. When in reality, there's just two different people, two different headspaces, you know, and I think that's actually another dominant ideology that this show's trying to push on us, that everyone loves their job. Everyone loves what they do, and they find purpose in it, which, I mean, dude, we live in America. Like, I mean, I don't even work a normal 9 to 5. I'm trying to start my own business. I'm the complete opposite of people saying, like, I love my job and my boss, and they're great, you know. Like, I'm pretty sure if we all took a poll, 5 out of 5 people would be like, you know, don't even like my boss. You know, I'm just doing it for the paycheck, you know?
Well, and Luke, I was wondering, like, when you were kind of looking at the thing about, you know, Molesley and how he interacts with Matthew and what Robert ends up saying about why it's so important for Molesley to have his job. What did you think in regards to the way that Gwen was then portrayed? Finally, you know, kind of in regards to the idea of wanting to get out of their current kind of like class level or what they're currently doing. Because, you know, she obviously doesn't, she learns to type. She wants to be like a secretary. And that's actually, and Sybil, of course, helps her being the suffragette, you know, pushes her to do it in secret, but they have to do it in secret. So it was kind of that dichotomy there. And I wasn't sure, like, in regards to your research, if you ever was just like, kind of like the way that they're showing the two different sides of the story at all.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think it's just the way that the writing of the show. I read an excerpt from, it was called Media in Class by June Deary, they explained it as effective displacement, where the show, like, the writers kind of pick and choose what sort of things to show the audience in order to construct this sort of argument. So like building up women, they're trying to make it seem like, it was a time where everyone felt empowered, not just men, but women as well, when in reality, it wasn't so easy for that to happen.
Which is why they had to do it in secret.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's not like, and people were ridiculing Gwen when they did find out that she wanted to do something else, especially, like, Anna and the other servants.
Yeah, I even thought that was funny, too, because it's like, in the show, in reality, if your friends and people around you are like, yo, you're bettering yourself, you're doing things to do that, that's awesome, like, more power to you. And in the show, it was like, girl, what the fuck are you doing? Like, we got a great job. They take care of us. They treat us nice. And again, those are the lies where it's like, bro, if you're a servant, you're a butler to someone, I'm pretty sure even nowadays, you'd be very grateful and happy if you did get a nice, like, person to work for. But most of the time, they're just barking orders. They're telling you what to do. They could care less.
Well, it kind of transfers over to the social and economic motifs that we were looking into in regards to how they say how grateful the servants were to be in this position versus living in complete poverty. So the fact that they're, now living in a beautiful mansion, they live downstairs, but they're still living in a beautiful mansion. Their clothes are taken care of. They always have something to eat, et cetera, et cetera. So are they economically more, are they economically happier than somebody who is kind of controlling their own life but living in a lower class of poverty? And again, how is that motif kind of glamorized?
I kind of wanted to focus more about the workplace hierarchy. Just like in episode 2, we kind of see a lot of tension between the aristocratic family and kind of the staff and the butlers. Kind of around Carson as well. He has a sense of duty and his reverence for his family. He's so loyal. And while the family itself sometimes fails to recognize this full extent of the staff's contributions. For instance, Lord Grantham, he comes into conflict with Mr. Carson when the butler tries to assert his authority over how his household should be ran, especially through issues of hospitality and traditions as well. I think this scene especially, it highlights very subtly but powerfully kind of the differences between the upper class and servants. And even though these servants, they have to do all these things, and they're running around, they're running the estate, there remains a significant power imbalance. This kind of reflects historical and ongoing class divisions, where the labor and contributions of lower classes are very undervalued, and they're kind of looked over and kind of just skimmed upon.
Yeah.
So even though they're in a better situation, they're still lower economically in regards to class, social status. There's that dichotomy of well, you're in a better place, but are you really?
That's funny. But so what's up with Matthew and Mary's relationship? Is that something that we want to kind of discuss? Is that something that we feel was a little, I'll say, off with the accuracy of how things are actually or were actually back in the day? Because what I get from the relationship or on screen is that, again, very romanticized. I'm not a historian, but I would assume that if you're a woman that doesn't have that many rights and that many responsibilities in the past, you probably have very little say on who you're going to marry and how your life turns out. So I thought it was interesting how they gave her that sense of control or power over her relationship. Again, another inaccuracy where it's that's probably not the truth of how it was back in the day.
Yeah, Leslie, when you were looking up stuff, how did you feel about that? Especially, okay, so with Maggie Smith, Dame Maggie Smith is who I was trying to think of earlier, and she plays Violet Crawley. She's the dowager.
Gotcha.
Do you actually feel that Mary, living in a household with the dowager, would really have been allowed that much freedom? We love the dowager. We all do.
Yeah.
She's amazing. But she's her own person, but she's also a stickler for rules. So those kind of fight with each other.
Yeah, she was as the older sister, knowing that she has a specific place in the estate. She is fighting the old tradition and the changing new world. But I do think that maybe she was pushing it a little bit. I just don't think that she truly wanted to the way that her younger sister did, Lady Sybil. Just because when she went to go meet Matthew the first time, I think it was really funny how he was saying that, I'm pretty sure that they're going to push one of the sisters on me. And when she walked in, he was saying something rude about it. And I think it was funny the way that she walked out and was like, yeah, like, I didn't want to anyways. Like, why would I want to? But in reality, she did not have a choice. And she wasn't going to have a choice. I think in, like, historically accurately, I don't think she would have had a choice.
And what about the way that they handled her, let's say, deflowerment, if we want to use some pretty words, and the way that it would have affected her reputation? Because the rumors did start. But again, it was kind of softened about the fact that she was willing. I mean, she willingly went to his room and engaged with this man. They essentially, what did they do? They fucked each other's brains out. And so do we think that talks to the liberation of the women at the time and kind of like suffragette movement? Or do we think that's kind of that's one of those soft little lies that
soft little lie, dude. It's a soft little lie. I think even nowadays, like, I know there's still things as arranged marriages, and when you think about that culturally, historically, like, there's a lot of pride that goes into things like that. So when you break a tradition or you do something you're not supposed to, there is so many repercussions in real life, but again, in this show, it's romanticized. It's almost like the romantic scandal that they're not supposed to be a part of, but we as an audience are somewhat slow clapping for them, and we love you, we love this, go girl. But again, this is just like you said, that soft little lie. That's not true. This is not how things go down. And overall, I think where I'm coming from is things like that are just done just to be able to sell a lot more stories.
Well, and I think that kind of talks to like what you were looking at in regards to kind of like the gender roles, but also the social motif that we were researching about the effect on the audience.
Yeah.
I mean, this was done purely for a story?
100%. I mean, I wanted to kind of even talk about that. Why do you think like a show like Downton Abbey even has so much content for us to talk about and discuss? Like, is it just to be able to sell a good show, a good production? Is it to be able to protect that history, the commodification of history of Britain? Is it for different aspects?
I think it might just sort of be like the writers want to feel prideful about, like, yeah, we made an enjoyable show that has some historical accuracies, and because it has that, it has more like credit basically, or like it's a more well-written show because it includes some historical aspects.
Yeah. I was like a couple months old. No, wait, how do I say this? I'll just say it. I don't know how to say it. But essentially, I just found out recently, like a year or two ago, that the Pentagon had a media budget, or has a whole media team, right? And so when we think about that deeper, I like to think that like corporate America likes to produce these shows that essentially captivate audiences by trying to rewrite history and almost do damage control, for all the issues that we got going on today, the racial inequality, the gender inequality. I think it's the point where now we're at a day and age in technology where all these things and stories are available to the public, right? And now we're kind of looking for answers, and this corporate America is like, like, instead of them pointing the finger at us, let's have them fall in love with a story that points the fingers at a bunch of different things that have nothing to do with the dominant powers. So that way, when they walk away, they're like, you know what? The past wasn't that bad. It's kind of all on the individual to move forward and to kind of better their life, which I also think was a very prominent topic within the show, placing a lot of the responsibilities on the individuals as opposed to their social and economics, standings,
Yeah, I think one of the big questions that we might need to ask each other about why we are so into these shows right now is, what do we get out of it? What do we get out of it by looking at the past in such a romanticized ideal?
Yeah.
Are we doing it because we're tired of what we're currently going through? What is it that we liked about it? And honestly, what did you like about the show? What was it that you were so it was like, did you love watching the clothes? Did you love, listening to the way they spoke?
Yeah.
What was it that, could kind of make you fall asleep to it because it was comforting?
I personally really love shows, or like just romance in general. So a lot of that and drama. I enjoy watching those type of shows and reading those type of books that express or show love. So that's something that was like a characteristic that I really enjoyed about the show.
Escapism.
Yeah. Would you have loved it more if it was 100% historically accurate?
Yes.
Yes, you would have.
Would you?
Probably not.
No,
I
because it
think
would have been more like a documentary.
As a
right?
scholar, I think we would have, but as an audience, definitely not. What about you, Luke? How do you like this whole show? What do you like about it?
I like shows that take a lot of time building sort of more of like the stories in between the characters rather than like the premise or the setting.
Yeah.
So I think that it makes it more comforting seeing characters that we like on screen or characters that we don't like and sort of rooting against them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that aspect sort of is what draws me in the most.
Nice. I personally come from like media production and whatnot, so what I like most about shows like this is the fact they go the extra mile to really make these costumes look amazing, make the sets look great, make the storyline look great. And the reason I like it is because it's like putting makeup on, like, you know, and I would say an ugly person. You know, you forget about all the things that you don't like about them because it's like, oh, damn.
Beer goggles.
Beer goggles.
It's literally beer goggles.
Yeah,
it's
so
the illusions.
There you go. You said it perfectly.
It's that guide of escapism and through the prism of a very particular socio-political construction of nostalgia, and it removes us from the realities of multiculturalism, sexual and racial equality in, you know, the law, cosmopolitanism, urbanizationism, the urban decay of the area. And really, it affords us the opportunity to avoid the realities of that post-imperialist era that they're starting to deal with. And, you know, it's that illusion that we love to delve into.
Yeah, I think this show is very relatable. I think especially for me, like coming from kind of a lower class and like where I grew up, I could definitely like relate a lot to the servants. I think watching like just off the bat, off that first show, I was like, dang, like I kind of relate to this on a deeper level. I think that comes for like most of the audience as well. And then also like just the relationships, like just like their love life, you know, how things go. It definitely like it's kind of there's like satisfaction like for people, and it's like there's definitely something that's like it gives you pleasure to watch.
Yeah. I think the show did a really good job of generalizing problems and just making them very G-rated for that purpose, to where a lot of the people watching it can relate, you know,
And put themselves into the characters.
Shoes. Yeah, and again, because it's a fantasized reality, it's easier for you to do that, as opposed to if you're watching something that's very historically accurate, let's say like something like a slave movie, 12 Years a Slave, where it's like, you know, obviously that still omits a lot of historical accuracies, but it's
much more uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's much more uncomfortable, but if they would have gone full on like historical accuracy, this is a documentary, everyone wouldn't be like, oh man, like I can put myself in those shoes, you know? Yeah.
12 Years a Slave was amazing. I probably will never watch it again. Honestly, because
it was
brutal, and I appreciated the fact that they made it. But to me, there was no rewatchability into it. So in regards to the capitalism,
you're not going to binge watch,
right? And the commercialism of course, Hollywood, you know, or the film industry or the TV industry, entertainment industry, let's say it like that. You have to look at the ideas of rewatchability and how much money it's going to generate. And 12 Years a Slave was amazing and it got awards and stuff, but I'm not going to just sit down and pop it onto Netflix and watch it while I'm going to sleep.
Yeah,
you know, and I can do that with Downton Abbey.
Exactly, and that's why we see multiple seasons, we see movies, we see even spin-offs and shows that are around the time period, kind of almost linking the universes because of that ability to be able to kind of, I would say, how did you say it? I'm blanking now. But the ability to have it be relatable, you know, and be able to connect and be able to constantly be able to watch it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I'm just going to say one more time, I just because this was the subject that was brought up, and I love the fact that this has already actually been basically talked about and satirized on an international stage. It was made for Comedy Central. Is that show Another Period? If you kind of want to stand back and laugh at these series, watch it, because it's what they do. They everything that we're talking about and everything that is wrong, I guess you could say, with these you know, historical dramas, et cetera, is satirized in this show in a hilarious way, so that you can enjoy watching it. But when you really step back and watch this, you're like, I can't believe that, you know, this is how we handled, like, for example, spousal abuse, domestic violence. You know, in the same episode I was talking about, one of the ladies decides to fake domestic violence for a completely other reason, but they have the stereotypical Irish cops come in, and they're like, oh, well, who hit you? Well, it was my husband. And the moment they realize it was the husband who hit her, they're like, you should go back in the kitchen, basically.
Yeah.
You know, and again, that was how it was held, but nobody talks about that in these shows.
Yeah.
You know, and if we do, then all of a sudden the show becomes really uncomfortable, and it's like, I don't know if I can keep watching this.
Dude, yeah, I think that reaction specifically, that reaction is exactly what producers don't want to have, you know, and that's why they sugarcoat these things. They romanticize these stories. They omit a lot of these factual evidences that's going to make us cringe towards the reality of our past, you know?
It'd be really interesting to have another podcast to talk about shows that do kind of connect, because like Game of Thrones is violent, full of rape and murder and just gore and violence, and we love watching it.
Your favorite show.
So I know, right? But why do we love watching that? But if it was to happen, the same sort of like, let's say a rape scene was to happen in Downton Abbey, that would have changed the show completely. And I mean, like, you know, because Game of Thrones shows everything, right?
Yeah.
But Downton Abbey, it would remove that genteel veneer. You know, so why do we love Game of Thrones, but we also love Downton Abbey? Because they are let's quote unquote historical. Okay, obviously Game of Thrones is fake, but it's still set in a historical era that we like to connect with. So why are we willing to watch that? But if we were to watch the same sort of topics in Downton Abbey, it would not have been nearly as successful.
Yeah, I think, like you said right now, it's because Game of Thrones is a fantasy, and we can, even though, like, no matter how crazy we think it is, we can always turn it off and say, this isn't real. This didn't even happen, you know. As opposed to Downton Abbey, if we were to see those type of tactics, we turn it off and we're like, fuck, dude, like we're horrible people. Like, you know, like I cannot believe we treated people this way. You know, so that's a
great point. Yeah, it's easy to say Game of Thrones is fantasy and that Downton Abbey is basically subjected to realism.
Yeah. So this is the end of season 1, first and last episode of this podcast. If you guys want to get some more, blow up our emails, our school emails, I guess. But
our socials.
Yeah, our socials.
Spread that shit like glitter everywhere.
Yeah, there you go. But we want to thank you guys for tuning in. Always remember, again, there's more at play when we're watching a lot of different medias. You know, it's more than what just meets the eye. It's more than what's being told to us. We want to make sure that everyone can, like, listen to this podcast and at least walk away with the idea of feeling like, okay, let me watch this next movie I'm watching. And what is it really that they're trying to?
And I think there should also people need to realize there's no judgment.
Oh yeah,
it's you know, yes, there's a lot of things that are wrong with these shows that we love, but it's okay to love these shows that we love, even if they're completely full of lies, fakeness, whatever. We all need that escapism, and that's why these shows are so popular. So honestly, we're talking about this because we love this show, and if you love it, get yourself involved in it, escape into it. You know, embrace that illusion, because that's what gets you through the day. And that's why we watch movies. That's why we watch TV shows, because we want to escape. So if you love the show, love it. Don't be ashamed about it. But it's okay to also sit back and be like, well, that was weird.
Yeah.
I don't like how they did that. I wonder why I feel like that. Ask those questions. It might even make the show more interesting to you when you actually kind of step it up and start to analyze the show and why you love it so much.
Perfectly said. Thank you so much for that, Tara. Wow, this was a great conversation, y'all. If there's anything else y'all want to chime in, now's the time. You guys got 3 seconds. Other than that, thank you so much for everyone for tuning in. We hope you guys have a great weekend if you listen to this on a Friday. All right, bye.